What's up, pals? This is Staicha from the Metal Pit coming to you today with the top 20 facts that you probably didn't know about Venom. Now, just as a little bit of a primer, Venom was formed in the northeast of England in 1979 and was hugely influential for a lot of your favorite metal bands, including Slayer and Metallica. Now, the original lineup of Venom consisted of Conrad Lant, Anthony Bray, and Jeff Dunn, and every one of the facts I'm about to tell you is about that original lineup. However, for the rest of the video, I am going to be referring to them by their stage names: Kronos, Mantis, and Abaddon. Right before the original lineup of Venom actually got together, Kronos worked at Neat Records in the late 70s. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's because that label was hugely influential for the new wave of British heavy metal. However, when Kronos worked there, it was run by Dave Wood, who firmly believed that metal was dead. Kronos protested over and over again. Dave Wood insisted there was no market for it until Iron Maiden released Runnin' Free, and Dave Wood decided to change his mind and gave some responsibility to Kronos. When Kronos was working at Neat Records, he actually was in a band, but not one that he felt was worthy of any studio time. However, it was his job as a representative of Neat Records to go and find other metal bands to sign with them. So he used to have to go into other clubs and bars, find metal bands, give them the card and say, let's talk about a record deal. Also, because of this capacity, he used to make logos for other bands. So before creating the Venom logo, he did do that for other bands. No one of note per se, but there were a lot of 80s metal bands with logos drawn by Kronos. We all know Venom as an amazing three-piece band, but before recording Welcome to Hell, they were actually a five-piece band, and their frontman wasn't Kronos. It was someone named Clive Archer. It was actually Clive Archer who decided to bring the satanic element into Venom. He was a massive Alice Cooper fan. He used to wear corpse paint. He wanted to bring kind of a goth element into Venom, and all of that satanic influence was him. In the late 70s, right before the original lineup was about to form, Mantis and Abaddon were actually in a band called Guillotine, and Kronos was in a band called Dwarf Star. Now, in Guillotine, Mantis was pretty confident that the rhythm guitarist was on his way out, so they started looking for a new guitar player. According to Kronos, they approached him because the rhythm guitarist had a short curly perm, and they just really wanted a guy with long hair, and Kronos fit the bill. Eventually, that rhythm guitarist did leave, and then the bass player left, so Kronos took over bass. And then Clive Archer left, so Kronos took over vocals. When Kronos first saw Guillotine, he described it as a singer doing an Alice Cooper impersonation and a guitar player doing a KK Downing impersonation. And that's probably not very far off the mark, because Mantis has said that the guitar player he idolizes the most is KK Downing. So he saw Judas Priest for the very first time in 1979 for £3, saw KK Downing, and decided that that is everything he wanted to be in a guitar player. None of them wanted to stick with the name Guillotine for the band, so they needed a new name. So the name Venom was actually suggested to them by their roadie and the guy who drove them around. When the original lineup of Venom was officially formed, what you essentially had were three young guys with absolutely no money. So in order to get their first demo recorded, Kronos actually offered to work for free and stay late at the studio in exchange for studio time. But the biggest kicker was they had to be ready at the drop of a hat for another band to cancel their session and immediately be ready to go in. This did eventually happen, and the first sessions were described as atrocious by them. So in the middle of recording, the sound engineer actually called Kronos in, said it's actually not uncommon for novice bands to get very uncomfortable for the first time in the studio, so he wanted to try a little bit of a trick. He covered the recording button, sent Kronos back in and said, okay guys, you know what, I'm just gonna do a little bit of work on the console, but just practice and do a couple run-throughs while I do this, and they sounded great. Kronos was in on it, Mantis and Abaddon were not. They were none too happy about the ruse, but they did end up getting a great recording. Once Venom sent that demo out, of course they got a lot of rejection letters, but their favorite came from EMI. Pictured right here, Kronos actually kept it because he remarked that it must have taken the typewriter a really long time to do this. According to Abaddon, Venom was actually the first band to have a logo that you couldn't read. Record companies were not thrilled about it and kept pointing it out to them. This is unreadable, and they kept saying, that's the point. And Abaddon actually loves that Norwegian black metal bands have taken that concept and just gone wild with it. When Venom was trying to establish their core sound, Kronos actually really looked up to bands like Motorhead and Black Sabbath because, of course, why wouldn't you? But one thing that he couldn't stand were Black Sabbath's really Christian lyrics. They actually had a copy of the Satanic Bible that they used to share amongst themselves, and that was one of the main elements that they really wanted to keep from those Clive Archer days. They thought, it's got to be heavy and pulverizing, just like Black Sabbath, but we want to have that satanic element in there. When Neat Records did decide to put out their demo, they brought in a producer that had never worked with a metal band before. After a while, Kronos did end up hearing it, and he hated it. So one day he came in, the boss wasn't there, no bands were in, he asked the secretary to just go home, he grabbed the master tapes, snuck in, and remixed them himself in under 4 hours. He ended up sending them out, and when the record actually got back to the studio, Neat Records was furious. They told Kronos that if it flopped, it was all on him and he would never work in the industry again. Of course, their demo was very well received in a lot of places, with one very notable exception, their own hometown. Newcastle was not very proud to be the birthplace of Venom. Abaddon actually suspects that it's because they didn't really pay their dues. They didn't play small gigs, they didn't play tiny clubs, they didn't work their way up. They essentially put out a demo and were immediately playing in big places like New York and San Francisco. Abaddon reflects on this a little bit and says it made them what he calls a Marmite band. After Welcome to Hell came out, a rumor started circulating that Venom couldn't actually play their instruments. Where did this rumor come from? Venom themselves. They got so sick of doing so many interviews that they just decided to start messing with journalists. They would coordinate and say things like, okay, you do this interview and say that we're classically trained. You do this interview and just say that we smack guitars against the walls and whatever sound comes out, that's what we record. And of course, them not knowing how to play instruments was just the rumor that happened to catch on. A lot of Venom fans have a real soft spot for the song Buried Alive, and it's no surprise. A lot of love and a lot of creativity went into that song. In fact, Kronos had an entire vision for how to make it sound like you were being buried alive in that graveyard scene. So he approached the sound engineer and said, we really want to create this scene. Can I throw some ideas at you? What they ended up doing was putting a microphone on the steps leading up to the studio and covering it with a cardboard box. Then they all got shovels, got dirt, got mud, and got gravel, and just buried the cardboard box so that it would sound like you were inside the box getting buried alive. When black metal was released, Kronos used to joke with journalists all the time that they were getting really lazy as a band and taking double the amount of time to put out records. And that was actually true, because Welcome to Hell was recorded in 3 days and black metal was recorded in 6 days. This one might be a little bit of a shock, but Kronos is a massive Rush fan, and he really wanted to create his own 2112. And he did. That is At War with Satan. Selling the rest of the band on a 20-minute long song was not easy for him, and they protested a lot. And to this day, Mantis does go on record saying it is not his favorite. After black metal came out, Kronos actually ended up befriending someone who dealt in bootlegs, and that person sent him a band in San Francisco that he thought Kronos would be particularly interested in. This band was all wearing Venom shirts, and he said, listen to the song Whiplash, doesn't it sound like Witching Hour to you? Kronos was like, wow, these kids are ripping off our songs and wearing our shirts. We should bring them on tour with us. And they did, and that band was Metallica. Venom ended up taking Metallica on the 7 Dates tour, and as much as, they were young and a little immature, every member of Venom did describe them as very hardworking, although it was pretty clear to all of them that Lars was running the show. Slayer was very heavily influenced by Venom. However, Tom Araya did have to finish their 1984 tour with Venom with a black eye from Kronos. The story goes, they were all hanging out on the tour bus, having some drinks, when a very inebriated Tom Araya came in and said, I need to pee. Where's the bathroom? Kronos jokingly pointed at his mouth and said, right here, brother, right here. And he took it a little bit too far, unzipped, and peed in Kronos' hair. Kronos, of course, got up and knocked him out. In interviews, the other members of Slayer have said that they were still very starstruck by Kronos, so Tom Araya's choice to urinate in his hair was an interesting one to say the least. Black Flag toured with Venom in 1986 and thought Venom was the most ridiculous band that they had ever seen. They made fun of Venom to their face, to the audience, to the crew. They could not get over how ridiculous they thought Venom was. They even taped Kronos' banter in between songs and put it out on a tape. The diaries from Coles and Rollins from that time have since been published, and they described Venom as real-life Spinal Tap and mocked the term black metal, mocked their songs, mocked their setup, the satanic elements, even Mantis's cheesy metal leads. As a side note, every single thing that they don't like about metal is every single thing that I love about metal. And finally, have you ever wondered if the original lineup of Venom will ever get back together for one more show? The answer is absolutely not. The relationship, especially between Kronos and Mantis, is extremely frosty. When asked if he would ever do a show with the original lineup, Kronos has said he would not put on a show with two subpar performers. Mantis responded with, "If you want to see a subpar show, you should watch your own lineup." So, as much as you can go see Venom with Kronos' new lineup, or you can see Venom Inc. with Mantis' lineup, you're probably not ever going to see the original lineup together ever again. And that's it! Thank you so much for watching this video on the top 20 facts that you probably didn't know about Venom. If you made it this far, you probably love Venom just as much as I do, so that is awesome and thank you so much. Don't forget to follow The Metal Pit on Instagram and Facebook, and check out our website at themetalpit.org.